Nothing changes. We continue with the rescue mission.
We're just gonna ignore Dev?
Give me an updated state vector for the Russian vessel. You got a problem, Danny?
Yes, Ed, Danny does have a problem. In fact, he has many of them. Hey guys, Pete here. Today I'll be talking about episode 4 of For All Mankind's third season, which managed to pack quite a few twists and turns into another solid episode. Happy Valley kept up the excitement of the race to Mars that kicked off in the final minutes of the previous episode, and by the time we got to the end we had a new crisis, and that may have given birth to an unlikely alliance. I'll be going through all of that and what I thought about it right after this quick spoiler warning. If you haven't seen the 4th episode of For All Mankind's third season, then this video isn't for you. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. In the opening of the episode, you see all 3 ships in transit. Ed is in high spirits when he contacts Helios Mission Control to tell them that they've crunched the numbers and there's no way the other ships can catch them now. They believe they've won the race, they'll be the first to Mars, and it looks like his old employer, NASA, will be the last to get there. He tells his boss, Ayesa, that it's time to celebrate as they're going to win this interstellar exploration prize, which I guess has a pretty big amount of money attached to it. Dev declares that he won't be keeping the money for himself, that he'll split it evenly amongst all of Helios' staff, and you see that Karen and Bill are awed by his generosity. Things are looking good for the upstart private space program. In his words, they've beaten the world's superpowers at their own game. Danielle makes a call to the Phoenix to concede the race to her former commander and his crew, and he makes the comment that innovation and out-of-the-box thinking win the day every time. This all turns out to be a setup because NASA still has one more trick up its sleeve. After telling Kelly to fire up a shanty on her iPod, which didn't come out in our timeline until 2001, they unfurl a massive solar sail, which will change the race and get them there 8 days before everyone else. It's clear no one anticipated this, and when Dev asks his staff how they can retake the lead, he finds out that they can't, at least not without doing something extremely dangerous. Karen tries to reason that getting there first isn't more important than getting there in one piece. And let's just say Dev disagrees. For him, it's the only thing that matters. And to make his point, he smashes a monitor on the ground before walking out of the room. We've all been kind of expecting there to be a darker side to Dev and his motivations, and that definitely comes back up before the end of the episode. There's a nice scene where Danielle calls Ed to gloat a little, and even though he's crushed, their personal history and the surprise of NASA's innovation leaves him with no choice but to congratulate her on her win, and for her to say she learned from the best. After the opening credits, we see some of the newscasts about how the sail changed the race, and the response from Roscosmos, who maintain that the Soviets can and will still get there first, which seems pretty unlikely because neither of the other 2 teams had been mentioning them as a threat. You also get a closer look at this backlash to the transition to helium-3 and fusion energy. That also comes up in President Ellen's meeting with the Speaker of the House, who's a Democrat that she has to deal with to get her budget approved. They're trying to strike a grand bargain to balance the budget and to show the people that bipartisanship works. But this idea of NASA being massively profitable without sharing is, in his words, causing blowback from his constituents, but he's likely also referring to the fossil fuel lobby. It's not really clear what the show is trying to do with this other than show that Ellen is trying to do good in her position of power but is coming up against resistance. After the meeting, Larry senses that she's stressed, so he makes the suggestion that they go to visit JSC, which she hasn't been to since she won the election. When she arrives, there's more protesters outside, and you see that Jimmy Stevens is in the crowd. He brought up problems he had with NASA at Danny's wedding, so I guess it makes sense for him to be at this protest where he gets recognized by a reporter, and then a girl named Sunny comes up to introduce herself and invite him to have beers with her and her friends afterwards. When they get together, you see that her boyfriend is the Moon Marine pilot that Tracy was training to fly the LSAM in season 2. He doesn't believe that the government is telling the real story of what happened on the moon, which we know is true, but him and his friends have twisted things around to fit a different narrative, where rather than covering up a second reactor, this is all about dividing the moon to split up the helium-3. And there are some interesting things going on in this part of the story, but it does feel a little out of place, so I'm not sure how I feel about what's going on here. In space, there's a little montage of life on Sojourner and Phoenix to give an idea of what the trip is like. Things look a lot more comfortable on the latter. We even see Ed jogging around thanks to the spin gravity. But we do see that morale is high under Danielle's command, even if it is just the quiet before the storm. On Phoenix, the crew are drinking brews and messing around. And the Linus, who showed Tracy Jamestown for the first time when she first arrived, is acting out a scene from the movie about Tracy and Gordo when Danny walks in. This leads to a confrontation where he sort of pushes him around and pressures him into doing this other scene from the movie, which is uncomfortable for everyone. And then Ed shows up to break it up. He stresses that he needs Danny to lead by example. After all, this is the reason that he wanted to bring him in the first place, to straighten him out, to give him a purpose. And he'll need him to control his temper to do that, which all feels like foreshadowing for something bad that'll happen before the trip is over. At JSC, Ellen enters Mission Control and gets her photo op and a standing ovation. She doesn't have to pretend to be thrilled to be back. It's clear that it makes her emotional. Margot sort of pulls Ayesa aside and says it never changes. The people at NASA do all the hard work, but the politicians grab the glory. When Ayesa points out that Ellen's one of them, Margot is quick to warn her that she's not anymore. Ellen gives a moving speech about how they pulled things together, how they worked as a team to beat Helios, and when she thanks them for their service to their country, you see Margot drop her head with a tinge of shame, and this, along with a lot of other hints, confirm that she did have to help the Soviets with their nuclear engine. That engine will be the catalyst for the episode-ending crisis. On Sojourner, Kelly gets a call from a cosmonaut on Mars 94. He warns her that his commanders are going to do something very dangerous to try to win the race. And before he can get into the details, he has to get off the call, and then you see them fire up those nuclear engines. They have a plan that would get them there 3 days ahead of everyone else, but when their burn doesn't last long enough, it's obvious that they have a major malfunction. Danielle tells Ed that their engines are in meltdown, and there's only 72 hours to make a rescue attempt. Neither of the ships have enough fuel to do the rescue and still make Mars orbit, so it means that going after them is also a ticket home. Ed realizes that it makes the most sense for Phoenix to do it, and is willing to sacrifice his chance at glory. Only when he explains this to Helios Mission Control, everyone who had a history with NASA is all for it, while Dev and his faithful vote to keep going and let NASA deal with the rescue. There are two flashes here you can't miss. Initially, Danny isn't behind Ed's plan, and on the ground, Karen is starting to have second thoughts about Dev's motivations. And I mentioned in my last video that in future seasons, it was getting hard to imagine who would be left at NASA. But after seeing this, that extra money might not be as much of an incentive. When Ed finds out what they decided, he decides not to change anything. He's going to go ahead with the rescue mission, but he finds out that when they sent the last message, they also sent a software update that locked them out of the controls. Dev anticipated that Ed wouldn't follow the orders, so he took over the ship, and now it's essentially flying on autopilot. The news gets around, and I love that Margot suggested nationalizing his company, but in the end, NASA decides to do what needs done. They throw away their mission to Mars and set out to save the cosmonauts' lives. On the approach, Danny tells her crew that the Soviet ship uses the same fuel as Sojourner and asks one of her crew to go and film the ship to see if Houston can figure out a way to transfer the fuel over. Of course, when they bring the cosmonauts over, things start to go wrong. Ayesa and Margot notice a problem on Earth, but because of the time that it takes a message to get from them to the crew, they aren't able to warn them. Mars 94 ends up crashing into Sojourner. 2 astronauts and 1 cosmonaut are killed, and the episode ends with everything up in the air. There's a lot of interesting things going on. Dev's decision changed the nature of the race, and the Mars 94 situation sets up the probability of a joint mission between NASA and the Soviets. There is some built-in tension, and having the defector on board doesn't help, but given the circumstances, everyone on the ship will at least be willing to work together in order to make it back alive. I already felt confident that the move with Sergei at the IAC conference worked to compromise Margot further, and all the references to the Soviet engine being similar to NASA's back that up. She appears to be ashamed, and of course she's worried about getting found out, and that all adds an extra layer to any cooperation that they have, and this opens up more possibilities. Helios is in the best position at the moment, but Ed won't react well to what happened. There was already hints at tension building up with Danny, and on the ground, Karen and Bill are second-guessing their decision to come on board. There's a lot of different ways that things can go wrong, and there's still a lot of episodes left, so it's a pretty exciting time to be a fan of the show. This is the one example of a new season of a TV show where I wish I hadn't seen the trailer. It kind of makes it hard to speculate on what comes next, because there's some things that I already know. The good news here, though, is that things are moving fast, and I imagine that we'll get answers as to how the rest of the mission to Mars is going to play out for everyone involved right at the beginning of the next episode. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of time for things to be drawn out. And that means that I do expect that we'll be getting into new territory beyond the trailer, beyond the obvious push for everyone to arrive on Mars. And then we'll find out what the second half of the season is going to be all about. I'm pretty happy with the setup all the way around. I thought this was another good episode that had a little bit of everything. Dev got a lot more interesting. The solar sail was a lot of fun. And we got another intense set piece at the end. It continues to be promising that they seem to pick up on the things like the questions I was asking last week and addressing them organically in this week's episode. Things like what's going to happen to NASA if everyone goes over to Helios. And I guess you don't really need to introduce everyone who's going to be on Sojourner if 2 of them are going to die right away. And that is a nice bonus that we'll get a little more of the Russian side of things when we bring these 2 groups together. And I'm curious to see how they influence each other while they're working together. This was a pretty fantastic Ed episode if you think about it. It really pulled on all the things that we know about the character and how he'll react to different situations to build up a situation where we aren't 100% on what he'll do next. I really don't know where they're going with some of the clean energy stuff and the Jimmy gets involved with conspiracy theory people sides of the story. I think it's a little early to tell. Like I said before, I think there is some interesting stuff they could do here, but I don't think any of that is working great yet. At the same time, it's a little early to tell, so we'll see how that develops. I'm looking forward to next week. Hopefully they can keep it up, and I think that's a good place to leave things. Let me know in the comments what you're thinking about the race, how it's playing out, and what you're hoping to see in the upcoming episodes. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.